LeBron James is now a brand ambassador. How'd that collaboration come about?
I think LeBron is one of those figures that transcends sports.
Sports betting in particular can increase the likelihood of a gambling addiction. What role do you play in combating that?
I cannot stop a parent from handing their phone to their kid and saying, make a bet for me.
DraftKings famously had that 9/11 promotion last year. Who got fired that day? Hello, I'm Ruth Umoh, Leadership Editor and host of Fortune Executive Exchange. Today, I'm joined by Jason Robbins, co-founder and CEO of the popular fantasy sports and online betting platform, DraftKings. I'm looking forward to discussing the company's growth and the leadership lessons learned along the way. But first, like, subscribe, and comment below to share your thoughts on this conversation. All right, Jason, thank you so much for joining us on Fortune Executive Exchange. We're delighted to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. All right, let's jump right into things. You co-founded DraftKings in 2011. Prior to that, you held marketing roles in companies like Capital One, Vistaprint. How did you leapfrog from that to the sports betting arena?
Well, we didn't start in sports betting. We started in fantasy sports, which I have been a huge fan of my whole life. And at first I was kind of like, I don't know if doing something that you're personally into, like, are you just going to sort of be biased and build a product that you like instead of thinking about the customer objectively? Because everywhere I worked before, it was a little bit more like broad, right? But it turned out it was a huge advantage that it wasn't just me, as the co-founders too, that they were into it. And I think that makes a big difference. I mean, you understand the customer at a level that you really, I think, can't if you're not a user of the product in certain industries, and I think this is one of them. And then, much later, when the Supreme Court overturned the federal ban on states legalizing sports betting, it was a natural extension for us to get into sports betting. And it was also just like a point in time in the company where it kind of felt like we needed to do something in order to reinvigorate growth.
Walk us through this entrepreneurial journey. So you have this idea, this vision with your co-founders. You're presumably still working a full-time job while testing this out. How did you balance the two and do it at scale at that?
Well, I had always wanted to be an entrepreneur. My timing was bad. I graduated college shortly after the tech bubble burst, and it was not easy at that point to go start a business and raise capital. But I actually was lucky. I went to Capital One and I told them that I was entrepreneurial, and they had just bought a business that ended up being a business that they sort of ran like a standalone almost. It benefited from being part of them. So I kind of had that startup-y experience going there, and I loved it. And then I went to Vistaprint, and at Capital One I met my first co-founder, Matt. I met Paul at Vistaprint. Matt ended up joining us at Vistaprint. And right when I was leaving Capital One to go to Vistaprint, it was 2008. So again, similar time when I was thinking about doing something entrepreneurial, but I'm like, you know what, I'll just go get a job, because right now there's not really a lot of capital being raised by entrepreneurs again. And then when we started to kind of get the itch, the three of us were talking about it again, the timing worked out better. And it actually ended up being a huge blessing in disguise, because the years of experience we got, and maybe more importantly, meeting each other and meeting a lot of the eventual people that ended up coming and joining us at DraftKings, was a huge benefit to the company. There's plenty of entrepreneurs that started out of a college dorm room and figure it out. We really benefited from working at companies that had scale, and we could see what it looked like, and we kind of had more of a like, okay, this is the kind of thing we're building towards. You always early on have to trade off between time and building the thing that'll work for all the things you want to do in the future. And as an entrepreneur, it's actually like a danger to fall into the trap of trying to build the thing that's going to work for 10 years, because then you end up putting a lot of time into things that won't deliver value now. And so what you have to do is, if you have sort of an idea of like where you're going, you can say, okay, what are the most important things that I know I need to make sure I'm paying attention? And then what are the things that it really isn't more cost, and I could just either do it this way or this way, and I know this way is going to fit better with where I'm trying to go. But there's always stuff that you have to rebuild, because I mean, if not, then you probably didn't do it right in the first place.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting comment that one error entrepreneurs often make is looking at that 10 years down the line, which is interesting because I often hear that you should focus on the long-term outcome, the long-term vision. So how do you balance the immediate needs with some of those long-term goals?
I think the vision has to be long-term, but the actions at a very beginning stage startup have to be extremely tactical, like very focused on like, what do I need to do to get to the next set of milestones? One, you don't have a built-in organization, so you're trying to get people to focus on something when you have like 8 people in a room, right? So you don't have this org that has like a product and tech org and all this stuff that's like sort of functioning on its own. So that in and of itself is a challenge. And then also, at least for us, I mean, I guess there are exceptions depending on the type of business, but we were very reliant on investor capital. And in order to do that, we had to be able to hit very near-term milestones that would give us catalysts to go raise more money. That I think was a big deal. But the biggest reason is you really just don't know in the beginning. You can have this vision and maybe like the sort of broad strokes of the vision still hold today, but so much of the detail has changed or has been different than what we expected. I didn't think we expected to be like we are today. So you have to be also very focused on like, okay, I found something. Let me go after that. Now I found something else. Let me go after that. You have to be very sort of willing to just iterate as an early, because you don't know anything. So, by the time you get to a stage where now, not that we still don't have to stay on top of innovation and thinking about what's next, but we have a lot of like data and a lot of people who are organized in a certain way and working a certain way. But early on, you have none of that.
We'll soon touch on the data aspect. At the time, what was your goal in 2011? I know, it's about some 13, 14 years ago, but what was your goal at the time?
Well, this is another reason I think things change. If you had told me at that time that we could take in a couple $1 million of capital and build a business that we could sell for 20, 30, $40 million in 3 to 5 years, I would have taken that in a heartbeat. As you go along, you kind of realize maybe this could be bigger than I thought, and the goalpost changes a little bit.
Was there a turning point, a real crucible moment where you're like, hey, we might be onto something here?
I think there were many of them.
Sure.
I think the first NFL season, when I saw how explosive the growth was, that was a big moment. I think as investors started taking a greater interest and more capital started, not just with us, but some of our competitors too, pouring into the industry, that was something that kind of made me say, maybe this is bigger than I thought. And then the biggest piece was when that Supreme Court ruling that overturned PASPA, and I was like, all of a sudden now we've unlocked what could be a industry that's 100 billion plus TAM. And now we can participate in the largest market in the world where we have a pretty good brand and customer base built up already. And so at that moment, I thought this can be much bigger than I thought.
You said the first NFL season you saw explosive growth. Which NFL season was that? The first NFL season upon launch? Okay. Yeah. Talk to me about that growth.
Well, we had a feeling just from knowing sports and fantasy sports that the NFL was going to be just way outsized in the fantasy sports realm versus the other sports. And we had an idea, but the degree to which just something that I thought was like fairly like niche-y at the time, and really like had a very small audience that had kind of been able to be built up, just went from that to like something that average person playing fantasy football or was just a football fan would be interested in. And it happens quickly because of the seasonality of it. So when we started to hit that late August, early September, and the customer acquisition was just ramping, and I said, wow, like this went from, here to here really quickly. It's also an important lesson for us in the seasonality of our business and how important it was during certain big events and times of the year, whether it's the start of NFL or the Super Bowl or March Madness or something like that, to really make most of those moments and acquire customers and activate customers, because the business is very seasonal. And even though a lot of those people that we did acquire that first NFL season, we were able to get playing NBA and other sports, I don't think we ever would have acquired them on NBA.
Let's talk about the customer, because back in 2011, you were very much a pioneer in this sector. More recently, we've seen ESPN launch a new gambling platform called ESPN Bet. We have FanDuel, we have Caesars, we have Fanatics. How do you stand out to current and potential customers? How do you differentiate yourselves?
I think it's that customer-centric view of how we build product and construct the experience. If you look at most digital markets, particularly ones where there's not super high switching costs and there's a lot of discretion, it's not, in this case, an entertainment product, best product usually wins. And I think for us, that's really been something we've been saying for years. And if you look at the way we've been able to build our share and grow our customer base, I think that strategy's paid off. People talk in our market too. I mean, there's, it's a very social thing. People talk about the bets they're making with their friends and stuff. And so, if you have a product that just clearly stands out from the pack, it's something that becomes known in the market.
Well, how do you ensure that your company
have
stands
to
out from the
build-
pack?
well-
How do you know? You're biased.
Well,
But
we have a
analytically
lot back
speaking.
to like
Okay.
we were talking earlier, having objective means of
Yeah.
measuring it. So we do a lot of third-party studies to understand perceptions of our product in the market. We also look, just objectively at what do we have versus what our competitors have, and we can measure things like, do we have better uptime? And uptime meaning like I go to make a bet in the middle of a game and it doesn't say this is locked because someone's adjusting the odds or whatever. You can look at, do I have as many options for betting or more options for betting than a competitor does? You can look at, what is the speed of my product on when pages load relative to, there are a lot of objective measures that you could put, and then there's the perception ones, the third-party studies of what do customers, which brands they prefer, what products do they think are the best in the market. Then we look at both. So, we'll know if it takes our app longer to load than a competitor. That's just an objective fact. And if that's the case, we don't want that. We want it to be faster.
Very much a tech company at its core. LeBron James is now a brand ambassador. He showed up for the Super Bowl in Las Vegas, sponsoring the brand. How'd that collaboration come about?
Well, we've been friends with folks in LeBron's circle for many years. Mav Carter's been a good friend for a long time. We've gotten to know Rich Paul recently too. And so when the NBA changed the rules recently to allow athletes, to allow active NBA players to do endorsements for betting companies, he was our top target. And thankfully, they were interested in doing something together, and I think it's going to be a great partnership for many years to come. Even when eventually, hopefully no time soon, he's not playing, I think there'll be even more we could do, because we can't do things oriented towards betting on NBA while he's an active player, for example. So he was doing a lot of stuff for like the Super Bowl and everything for us. But very exciting one. I think LeBron is one of those figures that he transcends sports and transcends generations in a way that, I think there's probably count on one hand athletes that you could even consider putting in the same category.
Speaking of partnerships, you also recently partnered with Barstool Sports, mere months after Dave Portnoy bought the company from Penn for $1. What was the thinking there?
We had many, many years that we partner with Barstool, back to when we were a fantasy company, and being data driven, we have a great amount of data about how it performs in terms of customer acquisition. And I think we felt very good about being able to model out what a marketing partnership with them would look like. And so that's what we did. And I think Barstool, when utilized and as a marketing partner, can be a very effective platform. And we've seen great performance in them over the years.
I want to really dig into, online betting. Obviously, it's not legal in every state, but the ease of access to online betting is, sports betting in particular, can increase the likelihood of a gambling addiction. One could be betting away their entire house without any real friction. What role do you play in combating that, any potential related mental health effects?
Well, first, we take responsible gaming very seriously. And I think one of the things that's important is it's not this black and white line between I'm either, somebody that is playing completely the way I should be, or I'm somebody with a real serious issue. There's a lot of things everyone can do to play responsibly, like knowing what is my monthly limit that I'm not willing to go over. And we actually provide tools that say, I can set that, where if you want us to make it so you can't spend more than X in a month, or you can't play for more than this many days, or whatever it is, we have tools like that that can set those types of ability. And I think it's something we encourage everyone to use, not just people who think, if you think you may have a problem, you shouldn't be playing at all, right? So I think it's really about using those tools if you're somebody that wants to play and can play responsibly, and it's helpful to you versus having to mentally keep track of a budget to use the tools we provide. I think that's a very important part of it. When you're talking about the very small percentage of people that do truly, do not have the ability to play and just shouldn't be playing at all. I think our role is to, one, help identify those people, and two, help them get the help that they need. In the end, it's up to them. We can't force somebody to do that, but we can certainly point them towards the resources. All of our advertisements have that listed very prominently. We also publish those things to customers. If we suspect that somebody has an issue based on what we're seeing, we have direct interventions that we'll do with them at times to ask them questions and make sure that they understand where they can get help. So I think this is a real opportunity that we have to take an activity that really, no matter what we do, is going to be happening one fast or another, and put it in an environment where we really can make a difference in this area. It doesn't mean that it's something that we're going to completely fix any more than anyone can fix anything where people have addiction issues. But I think much like what you've seen in other industries, I think that it is something that we can play a real role in and should play a real role in.
So you do think that the onus is partly on companies as well, or should the onus fall on customers?
It's both. Yeah. So I'll give you an example. It is absolutely on us to make sure that we do not let a minor register for an account and play. However, I cannot stop a parent, if they're in their home, from handing their phone to their kid and saying, make a bet for me on this account that I, the parent, registered and properly KYC'd, any more than I can stop them from going down to the store and buying a 6-pack of beer and bringing it home and giving a beer to their kids. So there is some onus on the individual in these situations too, but there's a role we also have to play. We have to make sure that we're both doing what we can do to prevent it, and that we're providing the tools and the education to help people understand this is where you can go, this is what you could do if you have an issue, that we're flagging things that we see that are problematic. But in the end, it's a delicate line, right? I mean, you go to somebody and you think maybe there's something there, and they insist that it's not. And by the way, that person's down money, and then you tell them I'm cutting you off, they get upset with you, right? So there is some level of, and by the way, the other thing is, if you get them to go self-exclude properly, they go through a statewide list. That doesn't mean they can just hop over to the next operator. That's something we're trying to work on together as an industry, because it shouldn't be that hard to do that. But there are very strong benefits to getting somebody to self-identify, just like with anything else, because ultimately that's what's going to get them to get the help that they need. And in the end, you can't make someone go get help for something. You can tell them that you're not comfortable with what they're doing with you, but it has to be on them to decide that they want to change that behavior.
Talk to me about your future expansion plans.
There's a lot we have on the roadmap this year. I mean, one, we're in this very exciting period of the industry where all of these new things that are coming out, they're all brand new to customers. A lot of obvious innovations that have been done in international markets still haven't been replicated in any way in the US. And so there's still just a lot of that. And then I think technology is really going to take this to the next level. I mean, as you think about the advances that are going to occur in augmented and virtual reality as an example over the next several years, and the ability to build that into an immersive, all-encompassing sports experience for somebody who wants to play fantasy or bet, I think there's so much that's going to be there. So I think we're just scratching the surface, and there's a lot of really exciting things that we're going to do. And this year, we're going to launch a lot of good new features for the customer.
We're seeing increasingly a number of states legalizing sports betting. Still about a dozen do not allow for sports betting. Are you lobbying? Are you in conversations to get it legalized, especially in massive states like Texas and California? And if so, what do those conversations entail, and how are they looking?
Well, obviously, we would like to be able to offer our product to everyone everywhere. So that is something that we're that we're focused on. But depending on the state, there's different reasons that they may not have proceeded thus far. And so, in California, for example, it's very important to have, an arrangement worked out with the tribes to be able to do something, I think, there. Otherwise, it's a very challenging path forward, and one probably not worth pursuing. I think that same thing, exists in Florida. Texas, different story. Texas, it's really about, getting just the legislative process to get through. We actually passed the House in Texas last year, but we didn't get a vote in the Senate. So hopefully, Texas meets every other year, so we won't have another shot at that till 2025. But sometimes you get close one year, it means good things for the next time around versus, some states where it's really more about figuring out the path through other means.
Are you eyeing global opportunities and expanding that international footprint?
Eventually. I mean, right now we're so early in the US in its development, and we feel like we're so well positioned here. And we actually think we benefit from being very focused on the US. Most of our competition either has brick and mortar business or an international business that takes some of their mental bandwidth. And there's power to us being able to say for the whole company, like, this is what we're doing. We're trying to win in the US right now. And when you're building that product roadmap, like, nothing else to worry about than that. So, it's not to say we won't go international. At some point, I would like to. We already are in Ontario, as an example. But I think that, when and how we do that will, I think, really depend on what's best for the company. And I think right now we benefit a lot from focusing where we're focused.
You're not in Puerto Rico, where sports betting is legal.
We're
Why
about
is
to
that?
be.
Okay.
We're working on that. We should hopefully launch there later this year.
Yeah.
We've even built it into our guidance, so hopefully it happens. But I think that's just a timing of getting like the right regulatory setup and everything, because there's some different. The regulation there is a little bit different than some of the states.
You mentioned this, so let's dig in a bit more. Every CEO at this point with their salt is looking at AI. It's still relatively nascent in certain industries, but you said you see opportunity for more of an immersive experience. What does that look like in practice? In your ideal world, 5 to 10 years down the line, how do you leverage in artificial intelligence?
Well, I mean, I think there's some very obvious areas, and then there's probably ones that we're not even thinking about today. So there's very obvious examples around developer efficiency. You can write more code if some of it's being written by AI. There's, customer service, being able to provide real-time support at all times to a customer because you have a chatbot that can interact with it even during heavy periods when a human isn't able to chat, I think is a huge advantage if you can do it right and give a good experience. All of it has to be done in a way that gives a good experience. If we're not able to give a good experience, we would look to do things the traditional way. But I do think that we're getting to a point where technology is strong enough that not only can it be a good experience, it can actually in some cases be an even better experience.
Yeah. To your point, the beauty, first of all, of being a digital company is that you have this treasure trove of data, certainly of customer data, so you can really customize the platform to meet those needs. But going back to the gambling conversation we had earlier, how do you ensure that the AI also isn't targeting your customers and making them more likely to bet and foster that addiction or spark it?
I mean, we're not using AI in that way. We're using it for things like chatbot and writing code. And were we ever to employ AI in a way that was like trying to do things that would like show certain products or whatever, it would be much more ease of use driven. So, if I'm betting on a particular football team every single week and you're continuing to make me scroll down 12 pages to find that's annoying. You want it to be up top. No different than like Netflix or Amazon showing you just bought socks last time. Here, click it if you want to buy it again. So I think it's much more convenience oriented.
But Amazon does say, hey, you bought this previously. We've noticed
you recommend
like
other
this,
stuff.
And you can recommend other things. And
which
you
most
bought
people
50 pairs
see
of
is,
socks.
I mean, I don't know. I think it comes back to, people who have gambling issues, they're going to have a gambling issue. And the job is to help identify those people and get them the help and get them to understand they need help. I just don't buy into this notion that you can do that. I think you can make life easier for people and make things more fun and convenient for people, which is the focus for us. If it ends up being something that, you're fostering gambling, then you didn't do a good job in the first place of saying, hey, we got to make sure people with gambling addictions aren't actually playing on our platform as much as possible. So I just don't really see it that way. I think that you have to try to build the product so that it's providing value for the people who should be playing it. And the people who shouldn't be playing it, you have to try to, have them not playing the product.
Yeah, and how do you do that?
Well, same way. It's through AI can actually be helpful in that regard by having good models that identify player behavior patterns and then having means of intervening when you find that there's somebody that you think has an issue. But like I was saying, it's a delicate thing, right? Like there's nothing that's gonna like particularly spit out in a definitive. I mean, all we can do is flag high risk situations and then have more manual interventions that dig into them. We have a team of people that are trained to do that. That when we find somebody that we think has tripped up some flags, they will actually have a conversation with that individual and make an assessment based on that conversation of what they think is going on.
As you look to the future, what gets you excited? What are you looking forward to?
I mean, a lot of it is just what technology that, we talked about a few things between AI and augmented reality, virtual reality, particularly in the latter categories, like just what it will enable. And I think there's so many things that, to give you an analogy, what we've been able to build for an app was dependent on having mobile smartphones. And if you don't have mobile smartphones, it's a completely different experience that we're building on the website, but that's how less than 10% of our customers are using the product now. They're doing it on the app. So I think you're gonna have these new platforms emerge. I'm really excited about the Vision Pro, for an example.
You are?
Oh yeah. But I think you're going to have these new platforms and like ways that interaction and media is delivered and content's delivered to customers that emerge. And I think it's important for us to understand where those things are going and be there. And customer behavior will change in a way that's like more macro, right? So we need like the phone analogy. If people want to be talking to their Alexa device to make bets, then we need to be able to do that. And I think we did a good job of that with mobile. Even though we were probably like the 20th or 30th daily fantasy sports website, we were the first one on iPhone, first one on Android. So I feel like as a company, that's built into our cultural DNA too, is just to be always thinking about what's the next technology advance and how our customer is going to want to be experiencing our product and how do we get there first.
What is your leadership strategy?
Have really good people around me.
Yeah. Any skills you look for in particular?
You have to have a lot of different skills. Having great people in all areas of leadership is important. Otherwise, you're going to have some functions that aren't performing well. And I think the way that we run our company, where people are so collaborative and so much work is done through cross-functional teams, it's essential that we have strong leadership across the board.
Yeah, you're unique in that, you're in the corner office, but you founded the company. But broadly speaking, what do you think it takes to get from the cubicle to the corner office?
I don't know. If I knew how to do that, I would have stayed in corporate America.
Exactly, at Capital One. Okay, talk to me about your company culture.
I think like we talked about before, just very analytically driven, very customer centric. Particularly, I think, bringing those two together, thinking about how do we measure the way that the customer is acting? How do we use all data, not just quantitative data, but we do a lot of focus groups and usability testing and other stuff like that too. But everything really starts with what does the customer want? Where is the customer going to want to use our products? How is the customer going to want to use our products? What is the customer going to want to use our products to do? Asking those questions and then back solving.
You said you don't think, or at least in the beginning stages of the company, you didn't think too long term, at least not 10 years down the line. That said, now that you've scaled, you're certainly a more mature company. I'd assume that you're looking more long term. What's your long term vision now, and how do you get all of your employees on board and much into the beat of the same drum?
Well, you're absolutely right that as you mature, you have to think longer term. And not only do you have to, you can. You're able to, because it's not as much about how do I survive tomorrow or next week. You know how you're going to survive tomorrow or next week. It's not as much about how do I get this team to do this project. You have an organization that's doing that. So you, in my position, can, and it's a complete shift. In the beginning, it was just do work. Like I was in the weeds, building, wireframes, putting together marketing campaigns, answering customer service emails. And now I don't even remember the last time I built a PowerPoint presentation. So definitely like a big change. I think in terms of getting the company, it's a balance because you want to paint a longer term vision, but also not distract people with the things that you're thinking about that are a few years down the road, because they're not going to be relevant to most of the people at the company for a while. And at the same time, you want to be transparent. If people want to know what's going on, I answer those questions. But I generally try to not focus too many people on anything beyond this year, other than having a high enough level context and vision so that people kind of feel A, excited, and B, they can think about those things when they're thinking about the day-to-day decisions that they're making. We actually, recently, we had our 10-year anniversary about 2 years ago. And we did a, recap of the first 10 years and then what do we think the next 10 years DraftKings will look like thing. And we still use that presentation, and we revamped our mission and vision statement and everything at the time. We still use a lot of that stuff to kind of set the longer term.
So what do you think the next 10 years will look like?
Well, I can't tell you that.
We'll circle back around in 10 years.
Sounds good to me.
All right. Well, I have to ask, because we did talk marketing. DraftKings famously, had that 9/11 promotion last year in which users could bet on several New York sports teams winning their games that day. You obviously faced a swift backlash and were decried for being tone deaf. Who got fired that day?
Nobody got fired. We don't fire people over that, but we definitely made sure the person understood they made a mistake. I mean, it was a young 20-something who's really hard worker, person from another country that didn't understand the context and made a mistake.
Sounds like you're taking the blame it on the intern loophole.
No, it's not that. You have to look at context for everything. I mean, in this case, I think it was an honest mistake by somebody who otherwise was a strong performer, and you make mistakes and you learn. And some mistakes, I think, based on the way that you analyze them, maybe do deserve something like that. But this wasn't one of them. I really think that if you have a culture where people are fearful that they make a mistake and they're going to get fired, that also creates a lot of negative aspects too.
I mean, it's been 13 years or so since you launched. I'm sure there have been many challenges over the years. What have you learned through, what immediately comes to mind in terms of challenges and what you learned from it?
I think the most important thing I've learned is just try to stay even keel. Mm-hmm. I had somebody at our company who's been with us a long time, about 6 months or so ago, I was having dinner with him and he said, you've mellowed a little bit. I said, thank you. I guess I've gotten beaten up a lot along the way, but you just learn not to freak out when challenges and just focus on what do I need to do to solve it. And same thing on the other side of it. You can't get too excited when you have a great day or a great month either. I mean, it's good to celebrate. Everybody should recognize, especially recognizing employees. But if you allow yourself to get too up or too down, I think it's too much. You can't survive. The swings are just too great.
Has there ever been a time where you blew up in the past?
No, I wouldn't say blew up. I just I would say I was much more stressed about it. I to the point where I couldn't sleep, or I never really got too up. But I mean, we went through some really tough stuff at times and it was very stressful. And I think anytime you go through anything that's really hard, the next thing just seems okay, I'll figure it out because we got through that. And so I think a lot of the early ups and downs just really solidified for me, okay, I'm going to be, even if I feel stressed now, in some period of time, a month, 3 months, it's going to be fine. So,
can you give us an example? Because we want color for the article. Yeah. Can you give for instance, you said you went through some really tough stuff.
Oh, I mean, in 2015, late 2015, when we, had the New York Attorney General coming after us and all these states and stuff. And we're getting beat up in the press, and we were still, as a company, a private company, losing money, very reliant on investor capital. I didn't know, I had weeks where I was I don't know if I'm going to make payroll next week kind of stuff. And you have all these people that are there relying on you. And I mean, that takes a toll on you, especially when you also have media and other stuff covering it and it's very public. I went in, a short period of time from having a company that was very unknown to being, just again, the seasonality of it. There was this big advertising campaign between us and FanDuel in 2015 and ended up creating the whole New York situation and everything else. And that was a very stressful period for us. But, it also, you look at it and most things have a silver lining. That's what led us to become a regulated business, which is what ultimately opened the door for us to have a lot of the regulatory, KYC, all the other infrastructure we needed to go into the regulated gaming business when the Supreme Court overturned PASPA. So actually ended up being one of the best things that could have happened to us. So that's another thing you kind of tell yourself is like, you know what, even the worst things that felt terrible in the moment that you were going through, usually there's something positive that comes from it, even if it's just something you learn. Most people don't learn as much when things are going really well as you do when there's hard times. That's what causes you to learn and evolve. So I think if you can go through enough of those experiences, you can channel that every time something challenging comes up. Remind yourself, one, I've been through this other thing, this will pass too. And two, how do I actually reorient myself towards getting the maximum benefit from learning something here?
When you were going through the thick of it or the throes of it in 2015, did you feel it was unfair? Did you feel that people didn't really understand you, your mission, the company? What did you feel they weren't getting?
I mean, a lot of things were just flat out false that were being printed or said about us, and others were gross mischaracterizations. So I felt that way, but I also looked at it and said, look, you can feel things are unfair. Life's unfair a lot. And I've had things that have been unfair in my favor too. So you can't really look at it that way. You have to look at what do I control and what can I do to have an impact on the situation. And I think the faster that you can orient your brain that way, instead of dwelling on this feels unfair or this feels like an injustice, even if that's true, it's not going to help you. Plenty of unfair things have happened and nobody comes back later and says, oh, sorry, that was unfair, we're going to fix it. And you just got to kind of deal with it in life. I have the same conversations with my kids. They're like, that's not fair. I'm like, not everything's fair. I mean, sometimes things aren't fair. We try to be fair. By the way, fair doesn't always mean you get exactly the same thing either. Sometimes, you're older, you get to stay up later, and you're younger, maybe, when your brother hits you, you get the benefit of the doubt a little more. And it all evens out somehow.
I think we have time for some rapid fire, yeah, very quickly. Lots of fans have cashed in on some long shot parlays over the year. A New Jersey man won over $489,000 in a $5 bet in December of 2023. What's the craziest parlay you've ever hit and how much was it for?
I actually don't know that. I can find out for you. Talking about me or like somebody?
Yeah.
Oh,
or even internally, but
I don't know, but I know we had one that was like $1 into like several 100,000. I'm gonna have to get back to you though on the exact numbers on that one. I don't know.
All right. Favorite part of your job? What's great about being a CEO?
Just getting to be exposed to all aspects of the business and all the different people. There's a lot of people that really have been able to build, great wealth and great lives based on, something that you help create.
Favorite sport to watch in person?
I like so many different sports. I would say either football or basketball, but I love watching hockey in person too, and baseball. I mean, they're all great experiences. They're all so different.
All right, favorite sport to play?
I'm not very good at any of them. I'd say tennis or golf. I also like to ski a lot.
All right, last couple questions. Do you have any tips for customers looking to hit on a long shot bet? What's your go-to bet style?
I like to go contrarian. I think when everybody's talking one way, I like to go the other way.
All right, contrarian take. Last two, what's the best leadership advice you ever received? And conversely, what's the worst leadership advice you ever received?
So the best that I ever received, and it's going to sound cliche, but I think it's still the most important, is just to get great people around you and don't settle for anything less. Have a really high bar for that and make sure that everybody around you is great. And I think, even though none of us probably perfectly follow that, as much as you can keep that top of mind and follow it, I think that generally great people build great companies. And the worst thing I think anybody ever told me was very early on. They said, don't worry about culture early. You'll figure that out later. Just worry about building and stuff like that. And while I think, building and focusing on that is important, I actually think it was an incredibly critical part of where we are now that we thought a lot about culture early and we're very deliberate about it. I mean, not to say we were spending hours and hours creating company values of it, but we're very clear on the type of company that we wanted to run, being analytic and customer centric. And we made sure that the people that we were bringing in were like-minded. And I think that first group of people that you bring in, so critical, because they're the ones who are hiring the next group, and then it just sort of all goes from there. So getting that right, I think, makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I think in many instances, culture eats strategy for breakfast.